Everyone. We have just completed our 4 weeks pathways series where hopefully you're feeling a bit better equipped as you live out God's will in your life. And as a practical follow-up, we wanted to talk about what life can look like after high school. Obviously, this feels really relevant for those of you who are near the end of your high school career, but it also matters for those who are at the beginning. So we want to have this conversation that will help give you some insight in how to prepare now for life after high school. And so we're bringing in a friend of mine from my university days. Her name is Cristy, and she works with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at Carleton University in Ottawa. And so we're so thrilled that she is here to share some insights on how to live well beyond high school. So Cristy, it's so great to see you. Thank you for doing this with us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm really happy to be able to share a little bit because transition from high school to university is extremely important. So hit me with whatever questions you got.
Yeah, so speaking of that transition, what are some practical things that students can be doing now to prepare for university?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, there's the things that your guidance counselor will talk to you about, just around like figuring out like what are you actually interested in, what kind of program. But I think that is helpful to think about, but also I just want to encourage you not to get too bogged down with that, because sometimes we have to actually get into university and have a bit of an experience, and then we can have a bit of realizations as we go, right? We're learning and growing as we go. So all to say, just don't get too worried that you have to make the right decision like at the very beginning. And I think something else that I would say would be helpful preparation wise is to think about like what have been helpful and like supports for you in high school that have helped you be really like healthy and strong, not just academically, but also maybe like in your mental health, in your emotional health, in your, what you believe about. Because if you can sort of pinpoint like, oh, like some of that is like these friends and they have these values, or, my family's been really important, or, maybe it was a specific teacher, then, you already have like an idea of what you want to be looking for when you go to university. Now there's tends to be a lot more options, and it can feel a little overwhelming. So if you go in having thought through like, oh, actually, I really want to find friends that also believe these things or that have values like this, then it can really help you sort of determine, okay, I may meet a whole bunch of people, but actually the ones that I'm going to spend the most time with and become the closest with need to sort of have at least some of these values, like what that will help me. So that's a little bit of like thinking in advance. But that kind of reflection is really, really, really helpful so that you don't feel overwhelmed about, even your social decisions when you get to university. So, I mean, I think that's something that is really helpful because it's not just preparation academically, but it's also preparation for like all of who you are. That is helpful.
Yeah, totally. And so when it comes to finding people with shared values, like what sorts of things can they do to determine that or to find them?
To find them. So most universities will offer some kind of experience, or like we call ours Club Expo, where there's like a room full of clubs and all different kinds of people that are running different clubs. And those clubs could be like rock climbing. It could be something faith oriented, like InterVarsity is on most major campuses. It could also be like if you're interested in debate, like there's anything. There's like a club for most things. And that's one way that you can find people like that have a similar interest, a similar value system than you, is to just go up and have a chat with them, because they'll have like their presentations and you can ask questions and all that stuff. So that's one way. I think another way is you can just like get involved, like in the first semester when there's like social events on your floor. I mean, if you're choosing to live on res or whatever, but even if not, they'll have different kinds of social events, even if they're online. And you can, again, like they'll just meeting people and being put into different groups and like sort of knowing like, oh, this is important to me. Maybe I'll ask a question this way. But yeah, I think clubs are really helpful because then you actually get involved in what like sort of that element of community around a certain thing or a certain topic.
Right. And you can choose what matters to you. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So speaking of the online thing and COVID, like what has been different about how school has looked like this year? What are you predicting for next year? What can students expect that to potentially be like?
Yeah, well, I try not to make predictions because, well, I just try and live in the present. But what I will say from what I've experienced this year is that our student community has actually continued to be a decently strong community of people that have met together regularly. We have weekly Bible studies. We have social, like virtual game nights, movie nights. We also do events where we invite our friends that may not have the same values as us. Maybe they're not Christian, or maybe they just are thinking about other things or curious about what we believe in. And so, yeah, we've still done lots of things together. And we've still learned a lot. And there's actually been a lot of like personal growth within our students this year. So yeah, so I mean, are there downsides to being online? Yes, we know that. But there are also a lot of things that really have translated quite well online. And so if you get involved in a club that's running and they're doing things virtually, usually you can connect and make some good friends through that. And then also make sure that you're getting fed or nourished spiritually and in other ways, like in your mental health and in your emotional health, because those are really important as you face the academic challenges of university.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of some of those academic challenges, balancing, having a social life and taking care of themselves while trying to do well academically and trying to be involved in a faith community. Like, how do students set priorities? How do they figure out how to balance everything?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like university like is mainly learning that. um, but yeah, so I mean, I think it is important to have to get plugged into a community where you're known, because if you just like, okay, I'm just going to focus on my academics right now and I'm not going to do anything else, then what happens when you start feeling really discouraged about those academics? Where are those supports that you need to actually, feel like that's going well? And so, really, as much as we try to compartmentalize, like put our lives into little boxes and be like, oh, well, as long as this box is okay, my academic box is okay, then, everything else can wait. Unfortunately, we're just not made that way. So we need to actually put a little bit of time in this box, probably quite a bit of time in our academic box, but we'll also have like some time given to making sure that, okay, what does it mean to eat right, and what does it mean to actually get some good sleep? What does it mean to have a bit of a social life and meet some new people, and like I said, become known in a community so that when things are hard, you actually can talk to someone and feel that support. So thinking of your life as not just academics, but that you have a whole bunch of little boxes that all make up like a healthy experience in your first year. And you'll need to actually put a little bit of time in some of those and a lot more time in some of those, but that's all going to be what's helpful. There's a bit of a trial and error process in that, but I think if you go in thinking that there's more categories than just academics, or maybe for some of you, there's more categories than just social life, then that is going to be really helpful in you, like in the longer process of learning how to prioritize and balance.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really holistic approach of saying, we can't cut parts of ourselves off from others. And so that's really great to figure out what the most important things are. And so hopefully for a lot of our students, one of the really important things in their life is their faith. And so some students may be moving to a new place to go to college or to go to university. And so it can maybe feel intimidating to find a new church community. And how might they go about doing that? Finding one that's a good fit for them, one that they can get involved in and be known, like you were talking about.
Yeah, that's great. So for some of my students, they just basically every Sunday they go to a different church, and they check out those churches. But I think that experience is always more fun and more enjoyable when you have at least one or two friends, like Christian friends, to do it with. And so more times than not, I actually see students get connected with a campus ministry like InterVarsity or Power to Change or Navigators. There's lots of them, and most universities in Canada will have at least one, if not all of those. Because then you'll actually be able to meet a couple people that are in the same boat as you. And so then from there, you can be like, hey, like it's important that like I find a church community that's more than just student age, right? And so why don't we go check out these churches together? And that way you're not the newbie going into the church by yourself every single Sunday.
Yeah, that's
But you have this sort of like group of people doing it with you.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And it can feel super intimidating to be the only one. And I love also that you talked about the importance of being in a community that's not just student aged. Because while it's awesome to be with other believers your own age, and that's super important, we also need to experience wisdom from people of different ages and maybe have opportunities to serve people maybe younger than us or maybe older than us or whatever. But yeah, I think that can happen better in a multi-generational context often. So
yeah. And I would say that there are some churches that have like a focus on reaching university students. And so, asking that, or like looking on their website, seeing like, is there something they're talking about students, university students, and sort of making those churches be your first ones, because then they'll actually often have like some kind of welcome or effort towards welcoming new students, which then sort of, in a way, like other students just come to it because there's space for them. And I really appreciate the churches that are seeing students as a gift and a value to their congregations, because you really are. Like the perspective and the time of life that you're in is very unique. And you have like, even if you're not able to take on, like a big role in your church, just being at that church, having some conversations with people, maybe like volunteering to serve once a month or something, that really makes a difference in the vitality of that church to have students there. So think of yourselves as gifts to the churches.
yeah, I love that. And it sounds like you're recommending that they do a bit of research before they go. I'm going to say, even while you're here at home, try going to a new church one Sunday when we're allowed to go again in person, whatever, and just see what it feels like to even go alone. What does it feel like to go to a new church alone and sit with that discomfort and realize, okay, that the world didn't end. I'm all right. I can do this again when I go to a new place. Or if you're close to wherever you're going to be going, maybe check out a church there ahead of time as well. But I love that, like looking online. Everything is online these days. It's really easy to do that research before going. Yeah. Are there other things that you would recommend for students to be doing now in high school, maybe even all grades of high school, as they prepare for whatever life might look like after high school?
Yeah. I mean, something that I think continues on into university that happens in high school is that your belief system is forming. And so, like, for those of you that have, like, for instance, Megan in your life, you already have like maybe a concept of a mentor, or a concept of like someone being able to like speak to you and walk with you in certain decisions, or even just big questions that you have. And that process of like coming to like sort of a clearer picture of what you believe and why, it almost accelerates in university. And so like the concept of being discipled or mentored, um, if it's a new thing when you get to university, there's so many new things that can feel like, oh man, like, how do I find a new church and start a new school and like get into this new schedule and find someone like that might want to mentor me? And like, there's so much going on. So one of the things I would say is, if there's someone in your life now that you can spend time with, ask the deeper questions, start having those conversations now, then it'll be something that just feels a little bit more natural to step into when you go to university. And I think that is really where a lot of the big decisions about how you will live your life in the future get like clarified. And if you think about it, like, that's a big deal. Like, I mean, not to say that when you're older, you can't change the way that you believe, but it is harder. And so I think making, some good decisions now about who will influence your thinking and your beliefs in high school, and then, how to be intentional to choose those people in university is extremely, extremely strategic and smart.
Yeah, I like that. And kind of you're saying also like the habits that we're in and what we're used to in high school, we're going to kind of default to that more likely in university. And so that could go for anything across the board. That can go for how you study, or if you don't, or if you procrastinate or not, or all of those things translate as well. But the same is true when it comes to our faith and our friendships and deep relationships. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. My students, I mean, just around academics and studying and all of that, they learn pretty quickly that if they have problems with that, with procrastination, it's going to like make their life very stressful in the end. And so you do learn a lot about how to, in a way, just like how to prioritize the things that are important. Why are you at university? Well, hopefully to learn. And so, what does it mean to actually make sure that your time is going towards the things that are most important in that time of your life? And even to talk about like, oh, hey, I noticed that actually I feel really anxious before exams all the time. Or I noticed that, I do procrastinate and do everything at the last minute. And having those conversations like, why do I do that? And getting to even to think about like why that happens is definitely something that could be very helpful to do before you get to university.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. Yeah, what what happens, like some of our students maybe have had conversations with people who don't believe the same as them, but they may not have had as many conversations with people who are actively opposed to their beliefs. And potentially that's something that can happen in university from peers or even from professors. So what encouragement or advice can you give to students as they relate and interact with people who not only don't agree with their faith, but who are actually oppositional towards it?
Yeah, that's great. So I would say a couple of things is if you're living your life out in your, if you're living your faith out in a way that is real and like even creates maybe some curiosity, as like people see you, encounter you, know you, then, there's probably going to be some opportunities for feeling that opposition. It might be overt in like how like people might actually say something to you, but it might also be covert, like something that you just sort of feel, sort of like a little bit like of a social, like I don't belong, in this conversation, or in this class discussion, like everyone else has these views, but my view is completely opposite to this. And so, uh, whereas I wouldn't necessarily say like, okay, like the best way forward is to always like speak your mind and put yourself in, the hot seat and, um, you know, um, basically like oppose that view. The verse that comes to mind is we need to be shrewd as snakes, but gentle as doves. So what does it mean to actually like enter into a conversation where there's already been some maybe relational connection with people? So like, rather than looking at the person that has the different view as you as someone who opposes you, you just actually like interact with that person and find the ways that you are similar.
Hmm.
What is a common denominator, something that you both have, and that way you're not like first and foremost interacting with someone in the ways that you don't agree, but maybe you're interacting with that person in the ways that you can like be alongside each other.
Hmm.
um and then as someone respects you, even if they don't like maybe think like you, then you being able to share your thoughts that are different than their thoughts, is much more received, because they're like, first of all, if they find out that you're Christian, unfortunately one of the first thoughts that people have today is, oh, Christians are not normal people. um or like they're super religious fanatics or something or other. But if they just interact with you like you're, oh, and they're like, oh yeah, she's really normal and really fun, then it sort of like breaks down some of their own stereotypes that are creating some of those walls of opposition. And as those break down, then you actually have a lot more opportunities to like talk about what matters to you and for them to actually listen to you and care. Um, yeah. And with professors, it can be a bit tricky. It just depends. I think that one, it is good to actually talk to your community and maybe get some discernment
Hmm.
about what is helpful in that particular relationship and dynamic, because it might be different for each situation.
Sure. Yeah. And I really like what you touched on about these false assumptions that shape what people understand Christianity to be. So they may hear that word and think something that is not true at all to who you are, what you believe, but that's either an experience that they've had or a stereotype that they've believed in. And so when you find that common ground and they see you first as a fellow human that likes to joke or play sports or watch the same TV shows, and you have that common ground, then it can start to change those false perceptions. So that's, yeah, really wise. I appreciate that. Mhm. Cool. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share for these students? Any last takeaways or things that they can put in their back pocket for when they're leaving high school?
Hmm. Yeah. I would say like, I know it's a very different and like there's a lot of question marks around like this current like transition into university. What will my experience be like? I said my encouragement to you is if you really, really long to continue to grow in your like holistically and of course in your spiritual life and faith, not to allow like restrictions, like for instance, COVID restrictions, not to allow those things to actually discourage you from like hoping for that. Because what I've found this year is that my students have actually they've actually become clearer in why they believe what they believe.
Mm.
They've actually had to face, I mean, yes, they've had to face some of the disappointments and hardships of not being on campus, not seeing their friends as much. But also in facing some of those like hardships and even some of the fears that they have around like maybe their future, that facing those things has actually made them trust God and like rely on their friends and their community more
Mm.
than if things were all just like going really smooth. And unfortunately, that is the case. Like when things are going really well, we do tend to actually rely a little bit more on ourselves rather than on depending on God and like the community that God's given us. And so, yeah, I would just want to speak a word of hope to you that actually like you guys weren't dealt a bad hand. It's not unlucky or like a bummer that you're going into university this year. But actually to look for the ways that God is opening up very rare and specific opportunities for you that other university students haven't had. And to really like put your hope in what God is going to do in you, but also through you as you enter into university, because so much happens. And it really is a trend, like a time that forms and transforms your life. So I hope you feel hopeful about your transition.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cristy, for sharing with us and being generous with your time and your expertise and your thoughts. Yeah, I think these students will be really grateful to hear from you. So thanks for being here today.
Happy to. And if you're looking for a campus club, you can look for InterVarsity. We're online, we're on Instagram, we're on all those things. You can also look for Power to Change. We're good friends with them. You can look for Navigators, Catholic Christian Outreach. There's lots of different campus ministries that have really, really great people. And you can always check them out now. There's no reason to, you can always just ask if you can jump in, especially if you're in grade 12. We'd be more than happy to have you jump into a Bible study and see what it's like. Yeah, don't be shy.
Awesome. That's really great. Thank you so much, Cristy.